Good evening, and welcome back. So this evening it's Chapter 5 of First Test, the first book in the Protector of the Small Quartet by Tamora Pierce. Chapter 5, Kel Backs Away. 5 weeks after her arrival at the palace, Kel decided to write a letter to her family. It was hard to get started. That morning Peach Blossom had stepped on her foot, bruising it even through her heavy riding boot. It seemed to hurt worse as the day wore on, distracting her in classes and at supper. Only when she'd propped the foot on a cushion placed on a stool did the throbbing ease enough to allow her to write. Dear Papa and Mama, thank you for the package with the candied fruit and cakes. I shared with my sponsor, Neel of Queen's Cove. He liked the cakes very much. I can't believe that 5 whole weeks have gone. I'm working hard. The teachers are strict. Master Oakbridge, the master of ceremonies, is teaching Yamani etiquette from Papa's book. I have to show everyone the submissions so much that I get dizzy. My favorite class is mathematics. I think the teacher, Master Ivor, is pleased with my work. Tell Tulane there are no banquets until Midwinter Festival, so I haven't served the king at table yet. Pages get to practice serving Lord Wilden and his guests at supper 3 days in a row. The new pages are last on the schedule, so my turn won't come until late this year. I won't get to serve at the high table at Midwinter. Only senior pages get to wait on important people like the king. I have a horse. He's a strawberry roan gelding named Peach Blossom. He's too big for me, but I like him. He will be sold or killed if I do not keep him. He is very clever and plays all kinds of tricks if I do not keep an eye on him. Also, might I have some green tea from our stores? It is very expensive here, and I truly need something to drink at night as I do my classwork. I did not pack enough dresses. We are allowed to wear our own clothes to supper, unless there is a feast or something. Might I have some of my other gowns and some more shifts? And could they be let down an inch? I have grown a little. Kel smiled at that last paragraph, knowing it would surprise her mother. She had always preferred breeches for wear at home, unless they had to don kimonos for an event at the Emperor's court. These days, however, Kel wore dresses whenever possible. She was not about to let the pages forget that there was a girl in their midst. Gowns at supper were just one way to remind them. What else could she tell her family? Kel stared at her letter, drumming her fingers. She decided to leave out that sometimes Prince Rold sat with her and Neel at supper. For one thing, it seemed like bragging. After all, the prince had made it a point to sit at meals with each of the pages at least once during the week since her arrival. That he sat with her and Neel the most could simply be due to his curiosity about the Yamanis. Kel suspected that Prince Rold wanted no one to guess that he was fretting about his coming marriage to Princess Chismaki. Instead, she wrote, Does Mama still have her sketchbook from the islands? Her pictures are better than the ones in books here in the palace libraries. Neel wants to know what things look like. That was true enough. Neel was curious about the Yamanis and how they lived. And if the prince also looked at the sketches, so much the better. She would not mention the bad things that happened, not the boy's tricks or Peach Blossom's bad habits. That seemed too much like whining to her. Instead, she shifted her foot to a better spot on the cushion and wrote on. There are sparrows who come to me for bread and the seed I get from the stables. They are practically tame and eat at my window sill. One of them is a female with a pale spot on her head. I named her Crown. She scolds the others, and she is always the first at the food, so I think of her as their queen. The sparrows get up before dawn, and it's nice to hear them chirp while I dress. There is an amazing lizard bird skeleton that is actually alive in my class on plants and animals. He likes bread too. Lucky for me, Neel said we can ask the cooks for extra food, so I am not forever trying to sneak rolls out of the mess hall. What else could she say? They didn't have to know that only Neel and the prince would talk to her, or that yesterday she had been doused in a bath of muddy water when she stepped out of her room. Thanks to that, she had been very late for breakfast, causing the boys to growl as she came in. For her lateness, Wilden had given her a week of mucking out the stables from the first bell after supper until the second bell. She would just finish her letter with a cheerful bit about the sparrows. Once she'd finished, she turned to get her sealing wax and seal from her desk drawer. Her bruised foot slipped from its pillow to bang on the floor. She yelped. Someone knocked on the door. Kel, open up! It's me, Neel. Drat, she muttered, and went to let him in. As he stepped into the room, he saw her lucky cats. Why are those things waving? She smiled. The legend is that a cat, waving to the first emperor, drew him out of the path of an enemy arrow. The Almanis make hundreds of them. They're supposed to bring luck. Good thing you have so many, then, remarked Neel, picking one up and examining it. Kel made a face at him. Very funny. She hobbled over and put the cat back where it belonged. I thought you were limping in the mess, he said. Have a seat and let me take a look. The door stays open, she warned him. Yes, yes, yes. Why are you holed up in here? He demanded. Come study with Roald and me. I will, she said, wincing as she lowered herself onto her bed. I just had to finish a letter home. I wanted to thank them for the cakes and things. Neel grabbed her footstool and sat by the bed. Gently he lifted her swollen foot onto his knees. And you say Peach Blossom wasn't trying to hurt you? He said. Her foot was one large bruise. He wasn't, Kel retorted. If he'd been trying, he'd have broken it. I really think he's starting to like... Ow! There's no reason why you should have this kind of pain, muttered Neel, inspecting her toes. It figures. You aren't at all ticklish. Very funny, she retorted, eyeing him nervously. What are you going to do? Fix it, he said. Foot bruises take forever to heal without help. I don't know, Kel protested, carefully drawing her foot away. The Amanis say it's better to live with pain. You have to let it roll away like water off a stone. That way, it doesn't have any power over you. They sound like wonderful, cheerful people, commented Neel. Any other useful warrior's stoic arguments? Kel shook her head. What would Lord Wilden say if he knew? He told us knights work through pain all the time. He does it himself. You can see it hurts him to use that arm. Wilden had shed his sling a week after the start of classes, and used his right arm now in weapons practice and riding. Sometimes there's no healer around, or others need a healer more than you. Well, you're neither a stone, nor a Yamani, nor the stump, in case you haven't noticed, Neel said tartly, and it's foolish to stint on healing in a palace full of mages. Don't argue any more. His voice was firm, but his hands gentle, as he drew her leg back onto his knees. Kel thought of her Humani teachers, who were taught as children to sit unmoving in icy rains for as much as an entire day. She was being weak, letting Neel do this. She ought to refuse the help, but she couldn't. Her foot hurt too much. Neel rested her foot on his hands and bowed his head. A soft light of such a deep green as to be nearly black shimmered between his palms and Kel's flesh. She felt it as coolness that sank under her skin and sighed. The pounding in her foot began to soften until it had ceased. Her toes shrank back to normal size as she watched. I can't believe you gave up learning to be a healer, Kel said when Neel released her foot. I can't believe you're happier as a page. An old page at that. Neel made a face. I can name 3 who were older when they started. Please don't, Kel said hurriedly. Once Neel started to give lists of things, even a 3-person list, he would not be content until he had also mentioned what books he learned the names from, who wrote them, and who disagreed with the writers of the original books. It was far easier not to let him get started. She said, and don't tell me you did all this to be one of the oldest first-year pages in the realm. Neel sighed, surveying his long-fingered hands. On the great roll of knights in the Hall of Crowns, 12 Queenscove knights are listed. Only the Maxons have more. In the scroll of salute, King Jonathan the First wrote that 4 houses were the shield of Tortal. Legan, Naxon, Minch, and Queenscove. My brothers thought knighthood was the greatest service they could give. But it isn't the only service you can give, protested Kel. You've got brains. You've got the magical gift. Why are you bashing about here? Keeping you out of trouble, Neel said cheerfully. Try resting your weight on that. As Kel stood and walked under his gaze, he continued, As to that ill-tempered nag of yours, I have an idea. She was no scholar, but she knew when a subject was closed. He's not a nag, and I won't take another horse. I know that, said Neel, exaggeratedly patient. But perhaps we can have someone talk to him on your behalf. Come on. He led her at a brisk walk through the classroom floor to a broad stair, up 2 stories, and down a hall. The academics' rooms are on this floor and the one below, he explained. Some of our teachers, the ones who aren't priests, live here. You won't get these 2 until later this year in magic class. Neel strode to a door decorated with a bronze nameplate. Numair Salmelin, was engraved in the metal. Below it, in letters more recently added, was the name Verilidine Saraceri. He rapped hard, then waited, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Why is he nervous all of a sudden? Wondered Kel. The door opened a crack, and a young woman peered out. Brown curls tumbled around a face lit by blue-gray eyes. Her mouth was soft, her chin roundly stubborn. Neel, hello, she whispered with a smile. Did you want Numair? He's sleeping. He was up all last night and half of today on a working. Actually, Dane, I wanted to ask a favor of you, Neel replied, keeping his own voice to a whisper. He was even more nervous than he'd been a moment ago. It's for my friend Kel here, and her horse. He likes her, Kel realized with amusement. A lot. She'd had experience with crushes, none of her own, of course, but her older sisters, Adalia and Oraine, were very prone to them. Dane walked into the hall, closing the door gently behind her. A horse? He's contrary and mean, explained Neel, and Kel here won't give him up. Keladri of Mindolin, this is Veladane Saraceri. Dane, Kel. Kel bowed. You're the one Bone Dancer likes, Dane told her with a nod. Lyndall says he's taken to you, and Neel doesn't like your horse. Kel shrugged. She hardly knew what to say. She'd heard so many odd stories about this woman since her family had returned from the Imani Islands. I was thinking, you might take a look, explained Neel. He's got a mouth like stone. Can it be fixed? And he's mean clear through. Let me see him, Dane replied. What's his name? Her eyes focused on Kel's, as if she could see into the girl's heart. Peach Blossom, Kel said. It wasn't until Dane smiled that Kel could look away from those blue-gray eyes. Peach Blossom? Not one I know, but then I have little to do with the noble's horses, she explained. Let's have a look at him. Neel did the talking as they walked down to Peach Blossom's stable. He asked Dane a great many questions about people Kel did not know. She followed them, feeling out of place. When they entered the stable, all of the horses came to the front of their stalls to greet Dane. Shyly, Kel pointed her gelding out. Dane went to Peach Blossom and stood nose to nose with him, her hands cupped under the horse's chin. Peach Blossom's ears were pricked forward with interest. He was more relaxed with Dane than Kel had ever seen him. Neel made the mistake of trying to stroke him. Back went the gelding's ears, up went his head. Neel snatched away his hand. Excuse me, he muttered. Ignoring him, Dane ran her hands over the horse, inspecting every inch. Kel watched the examination. Peach Blossom seemed to like Dane's touch. When she was finished, he rested his nose against her gown, which was now covered with horsehair. What do you want of him? Dane asked Kel. I can soften his mouth, but if you're forever dragging at the rein, it'll just get hard again. Stefan's done wonders with these scars, though Peach Blossom says they still pain him some. I can mend those, but if you make him fight, and you spur him as some do their mounts, he'll be scarred again. And I can't change his nature for you. Peach Blossom is who he is. No one has the right to take that away. I wouldn't ask it, Kel replied firmly. We get on all right. Neel snorted. Kel ignored him, telling Dane, if he didn't hurt from his scars, that might help, and softening his mouth would be a blessing. I'm not one for using the rein hard. That's what he says. He also says that if you promise never to use spurs, he'll mind his manners a bit more. She has to have spurs when we get to riding in armor, Neel pointed out. Lord Wilden makes all the 3rd and 4th years wear them. There are spurs that don't cut the horse, said Dane quietly. Peach Blossom will settle for those. You really want to keep him? Kel shrugged. It's drawing carts or death if I don't. I'll buy him, Dane offered. I think I have enough. I'll take him off your hands and find you a better mount. Peach Blossom turned his head away from Dane to look at Kel. She felt a pang at the thought of losing him. She admired the big gelding's independence, the way he didn't seem to care if people liked him or not. She wished she could be more like that. Peach Blossom would be happier with someone who could talk to him, though. Dane would be good to him. Peach Blossom put 2 hooves back, then 2 more. Another step, and he could turn away from Dane to face Kel. His ears twitched forward. When Kell, unbelieving, held out her open hand, as Neel winced, Peach Blossom lowered his head and softly licked her palm. "That's that," remarked Dane. "He says you need looking after." "I never thought I'd end up agreeing with a horse," murmured Neel. Peach Blossom's ears went flat. He blew a wad of spit onto Neel's shirt. "He also says because he will let Kell ride him doesn't mean he has to be nice to everyone," Dane remarked, her eyes twinkling. "Come to me, Peach Blossom." Sorry, technical difficulty. "Come to me, Peach Blossom. We've still your hurts to mend." To Kell she added, "I'll teach him spoken commands for when you need him to go faster. You won't need spurs with those." Neel walked Dane back to her rooms. Kell returned to the pages wing alone, feeling very much in the way and thinking of the classwork on her desk. On the way she stopped at the mess hall kitchen. She helped herself to an apple and begged 2 rolls for her sparrows from the cook. She was near her room when voices drew her attention. They came from the hall ahead. "Pages are supposed to be graceful, not clumsy." Kell knew Joran's mocking tones well. She froze. "Clumsy?" She also knew Merrick's voice. Something clattered and crashed. A boy yelped. Kell turned into the hall to see what was going on. 3 older pages stood over Merrick, who had fallen. Apparently, he'd been carrying a heavy pitcher and cups on a tray. Now milk had splashed everywhere, and the dishes lay in pieces. "Don't just grovel there," jeered Vincent, one of Joran's friends. "Stand and mop it up." "Fetch us another pitcher of milk, and fresh cups," added Joran. "How can we study if we are thirsty?" Cal clenched her fists. It was the custom that Anders had described, the one in which older pages made first years do errands to earn their right to be considered true pages. Cal had done such errands herself for the prince. Most senior pages understood that first years had little time for their work and gave them tasks that were small and quickly done. But she'd heard whispers that Joran liked the custom a bit too much and liked to add a bit of pain to his errands. Merrick stood dripping milk, his pale face crimson with shame. "I'll need clothes," he said. Joran planted his hand on the small boy's back and shoved. Merrick's feet slipped. He flew forward, landing on his face again. "Use what you're wearing for cloths," Joran said merrily. "They're doing well enough so far." "And shut up while you're at it," added Vincent. The third member of their trio, Zahir, caught sight of Kel. He elbowed Joran and pointed to her. "Get mopping," Joran ordered Merrick. "Every drop, mind." He turned to Kel. "What's the matter with you, probationer?" he demanded coldly. Kel clenched her fists. "This is servant's work," she said. "It has nothing to do with being a page and fetching and carrying for people. It isn't what's meant by earning our way." Joran took a step forward. "This is none of your affair, unless you want what he's getting." Merrick looked at Kel, then away. Kel remained where she was, frozen with indecision. They were older, taller, and faster, and every muscle trained hard by Lord Wilden. These student warriors would outrank her in the Yamani Islands. There she would owe them her obedience. In Yaman, picking on a younger warrior would be considered a waste of time owed to your overlord, she thought numbly. If I interfere, I might give Lord Weldon an excuse to get rid of me, she realized. Joran's face went even harder. He came down the hall, fists raised. For the first time in her life, Calendry of Mindolin ran from a fight with a bully. Reaching the safety of her room, she locked the door behind her. Even there, she thought she could still hear the laughter that had followed her escape. Somehow she managed a little classwork before the bell rang for bed. She got into her nightdress and crawled under the covers, shivering. Over and over, she saw the scene in her mind, with poor Merrick outnumbered and unable to fight back. He'd been right to be afraid, she told herself repeatedly. She'd been right to be afraid. Giving way to superior force was how the world worked. Some day she and Merrick would both show Joran and his crew how it felt to be humiliated and afraid. So if she thought they would fear her, why didn't she feel better? She'd done the wise thing, hadn't she? "You could tell on them," a voice whispered in her heart. "You know they tripped Merrick deliberately. No one is supposed to take the earning your way custom that far." She flinched at the thought. Pages were not tattletales. They dealt with problems or suffered in silence. Everyone would despise her for breaking that unwritten law. Wilden would despise her. Her brothers would shake their heads in shame. She would be sent home. You saw a bad thing done and you didn't raise a hand or speak out, argued her better self. Could you swear a knife's oath, knowing that you once let bullies get away with it? If I get in fights, won't Lord Wilden use that as an excuse to be rid of me? Perhaps not. She'd heard Andrew's stories. Pages were expected to fight, win or lose, and take the punishments doled out. Olenna the Lioness was in fights as a page. She got punished for them all. She took her punishment and never gave up the names of those she'd fought with. That was how things were done. Of course, none of them had been on probation. Only Kelladry of Mindolin has served that bowl of sour soup. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, she scolded, trying to find a spot in her bed that wasn't hot from her thrashing around. We don't argue with custom. We obey it. Wiser people than us started such things. It's as simple as that. But what if custom is wrong? Demanded the part of her that believed in the code of chivalry. A knight must set things right. I'm not a knight yet, she told herself, punching a pillow that seemed determined to smother her. Not even a real page. I'll worry about things like that when I am. Shouldn't I worry about them all along? If I don't worry about them as a page or a squire, why should I care about them when I am a knight? At last, she slept. The first thing she noticed that was not a part of her unhappy night was the prickle of tiny claws on her hand. She opened her eyes and looked down. A sparrow, the female with the spot on her head that Kell had named Crown, stood on her hand, looking at her. Crown turned her head this way and that, as if trying to decide what to do with this great lazy girl who lay abed when the sun was about to rise. Kell looked at her windows, certain she had not opened the lower set of shutters the night before. She was right. Only the small upper shutters were open. Crown had flown in through those, seeing well enough in the pre-dawn glow to land safely on Kell. It seemed the bird had exhausted her supply of patience. She jumped onto Kell's chin and pecked her gently on the nose. "All right," Kell croaked. At the first movement of her chin, the bird hopped back to her chest. "Tell your friends I'm coming." Crown flew up and out of the open shutters, for all the world as if she had understood. Neel said the animals around here are strange, Kell thought, tossing her blankets aside. I guess he's right. Lurching to the windows, she opened the lower shutters. The sparrow flock, brown and tan females and black-collared males alike, sat on the sill in a line, watching her. I hope you had a better night than I did, Kell told them, getting her rolls and seed. In the mess hall, Neel squinted at her as she toyed with her breakfast. You look as bad as I feel, he croaked. Where's the sunny smile, the hello, Neel, isn't it a wonderful day to be alive in the royal palace? Pay the bum greatly usually I get? Cal considered shoving her porridge into his face and decided against it. I don't know, she said at last. Why don't you go look for it? Neel sat up. Ouch! It bites. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded sharply, tired of hiding the way she felt. That I'll say yes and so mope to anything, smile and go along no matter what, never argue, never complain? Neel looked more awake with every word. He ran his fingers through his hair. What's gotten into you? Did somebody put hot peppers in your wash water? Nothing. Cal slammed her bowl onto her tray and carried it to the servants. Neel stopped her at the mess door. Did anything happen last night after you left? Nothing, she said, biting off the words. Not one God's blessed thing. She left him to finish breakfast and went back to her room for her practice jacket. She was halfway there when Cleon stopped her. He was a third-year page, a joker who still sported a tan from days spent in his father's fields, bringing in the harvest. Page, I need my archer's glove, he told her with a grin. Run to my room and fetch it. When Cal frowned at him, not wanting to be bothered just then, he flapped his hands. Run along now, don't take all day. You don't want punishment duty for being late. As far as she knew, Cleon wasn't one of Joran's friends. He was just being a pain. The broad grin on his face told her that much. What if I refuse, she wondered, even as her feet started down the hall, carrying the rest of her with them. What could he do to me? But she didn't refuse. If I'm to be a coward when I think someone goes too far with the custom, I might as well be one all the time, she thought bitterly. She ran to do as she was bid. She caught up to Cleon as the pages were filing into the first practice of the day, and thrust his archery glove into his face. "Very good," he said, taking it. "You know, we all thought you wouldn't last this long." Cal stared at him, thinking, what an odd thing to say. "Last this long today, or last this long for 5 weeks?" she asked. "In training, you know." He spread his arms, taking in their surroundings. "Everyone had bets on that you'd run home before a week was up." He shook his head, smiling. "You might want to run now, while you still have the strength. Lord Wilden will never let you stay." "He might surprise you," Cal retorted, keeping her face Yamani smooth. Cleon smiled oddly. "He never surprises anyone." He sauntered into the yard. "Maybe he doesn't know Lord Wilden as well as he thinks he does," Cal thought grimly as she followed him through the gate. "I have to believe that." There you go, chapter 5. So Friday, tomorrow again at 8:30, and we'll move on to chapter 6. Thank you, and thanks once again to Tamora for allowing this reading.